Hello and welcome to Dining with Death, True Crime Tuesday. For many people, the Christmas season is, as the song says, the most wonderful time of the year. But for some, it is not. During the holidays, suicide rates rise, domestic violence incidences rise, and crisis hotlines see a substantial increase in calls. There are some people who use the holidays as an excuse to be the worst version of themselves, and some people are always the worst version of themselves. This is the story of the Dayton Christmas Killing Spree. Let's get into it. December 1992. Downtown Dayton, Ohio is bustling with activity and filled with decorations for the holiday season. There was the annual Christmas tree lighting on Courthouse Square, and the Dayton Arcade nearby had reopened temporarily with pop-up restaurants and shops to accommodate holiday shoppers. People were in a good mood for the holidays and were going about their busy work preparing for the big day. They had no way of knowing what was about to happen in their city. A gang of teenagers was out looking to start trouble. They called themselves the Downtown Posse. That's a really embarrassing name, but you have to remember it was the 90s and very early 90s at that. There was some kind of lame stuff going on back then, but the Downtown Posse, that's pretty bad. The group consisted of Laura Jean Taylor, who was only 16, Marvalis Matthew Keene, Laura's boyfriend and the group leader, he was 19, Heather Nicole Matthews, who was 20, and DeMarcus Maurice Smith, who was just 17 years old at the time. Marvalis was considered the leader of the group, but many say it was just as much Laura as it was Marvalis. Most of the gang members were estranged from their families and were probably feeling angry that other people were enjoying the holidays when their lives were not going so well. 16-year-old Laura Taylor, who was a runaway, said to the group, "Let's get some drama in our lives." For most of us, that would mean a little gossip or a night out. That's not what it meant for this group. Christmas Eve, 1992. The group come up with a plan. Laura and Heather will lure this man named Joseph Wilkerson, who was a 34-year-old General Motors worker, back to his house on Prescott Avenue, promising him sex. When they get there, they tie him to the bed, and then Marvalis Keene stepped into the room and shot him and killed him where he lay. As this man lay dead in his bedroom, the group drove his cars and ate his food and stayed in the home for the next couple of days, all with him dead and tied to the bed. But they were far from finished. They left Joseph's home later on Christmas Eve and went out into the city intent on creating more mayhem. They didn't care how, they didn't care who they hurt. They were just bored and mean and heartless and angry, and someone was going to pay for their misery. Danita Golette, who went by Nita, just 18 years old, was minding her own business on her way home. She was attending John H. Patterson High School and was focused on learning drafting. She had a toddler, and people say she was the sweetest, most amazing mother who loved her baby and was working hard to provide a good life for her and her baby. She worked at Rally's restaurant on Salem Avenue in order to earn money while attending school. Nita was just using a payphone outside a neighborhood market in West Dayton on Neal Avenue. The gang was in the area. They walked by her, and Marvalis Keene pointed a gun at Nita through the glass of the phone booth and said, "Merry Christmas," and shot her for doing absolutely nothing but using the phone. The group then stole Danita's coat and Fila's sneakers as she begged for her life. Marvalis fired 9 more shots into her, killing her. Danita had 50 cents in her pocket. Detective Doyle Burke later said of this killing, "Sometimes on this job, you can look at the scene and get an idea of the why, but in some cases, and this is a good example, there is no why. There is just no reason whatsoever." Killing two totally innocent human beings on Christmas Eve wasn't enough for this group. They then went to Yuma Place, where a man named Jeffrey Wright lived. He was Heather Matthews' ex-boyfriend. DeMarcus Smith shot him 4 times in the legs. Jeffrey Wright survived, but with terrible injuries. Christmas Day, 1992. While most people were opening their gifts and having Christmas breakfast, spending time with their families, or maybe working to get that double overtime pay, the downtown posse still wasn't satisfied with all the destruction and sadness and death they had already caused. Sometimes I wonder in these situations if these people are just so miserable that they want to end their own lives, and instead of just doing that, they do things that will ensure they'll be locked up forever. It's like they're looking for a way out, a way to never have to live an adult life, to have a job, to have responsibilities, to have stresses that we all face. They don't really want to die, but they just don't really want to live. And yeah, that is very sad. But I have very little sympathy for these types of people because we all have troubles, we all have stress, we all have problems. The minute you take those problems and you force them onto someone else, my sympathy for you is gone and it's transferred to the person that you're pushing your own issues onto. That may sound harsh, but that's just the way I feel about this. With the exception of a very tiny percentage of people on this planet who are too ill to know what's right and what's wrong, the rest of us do. We know what's right and what's wrong. People can blame their circumstances or their upbringing, and I do believe that those things play into people's lives. I'm not a pull yourself up by your bootstraps kind of person. Some people have it really, really hard. But even when you have it really, really hard, you still know what is right and what is wrong. And if you choose to do wrong, you leave the rest of us no choice. You get locked up. If you cannot act as a member of society that doesn't hurt other people, that doesn't engage in dangerous activity that hurts other people, doesn't kill other people, then you don't get to be a member of society. Does the system always work? Of course not. But when something like this happens, where you have 4 people that are just so cowardly and so evil and so heartless, you will have to wait here for a few hours while I go and look for a to give about what happens to them. Laura Taylor decided she wanted to kill her ex-boyfriend. I guess after seeing Heather Matthews' ex get shot, she was feeling left out. So they went to the home of Richmond Maddox, who was just 19 years old, and Laura coaxed her old boyfriend to get into the car with her. He didn't know that he and Laura were being followed in another car by Heather, Marvalis, and DeMarcus. Richmond was actually driving the car that he and Laura were in, and he soon noticed that they were being followed. He gunned the car to get away from the car that was following them. Laura Taylor, this 16-year-old girl, then put a derringer to Richmond Maddox's right temple and fired. The car began to slow down and Laura jumped out of the car, which then crashed on Benton Avenue. Richmond was later declared dead by gunshot wound. Laura had simply executed this young man. It's just unbelievable that a 16-year-old girl could do something like this. It's not unbelievable. Why do I say things like that? She did it. Then Marvalis Keene and DeMarcus Smith carjacked a Dodge Shadow at one of the downtown Dayton gas stations. The gang got into the car and spent the rest of the day driving around. December 26, 1992. The gang shows up at a mini-mart on the corner of West 5th Street, which is in a really rundown area of Dayton. They walked into the store and pointed guns at the counterwoman, Sarah Abraham, who was 38 years old. She opened the till and gave them all the money inside, every red cent, and then they shot and killed her anyway. Shot and killed her after she gave them exactly what they wanted, did exactly what they wanted, and for her life, they got $44. They also shot and wounded a customer during the robbery, 67-year-old Jones Pettis, but he survived his injuries. Now, it's at this point that the gang starts to worry that they're going to get caught. I mean, now they're starting to worry about that. And they realize that when they shot Jeffrey Wright, Heather's ex-boyfriend, there were 2 witnesses at the Yuma Place house, which was kind of a flop house. So they go back to that location and picked up Marvin Washington, age 19, and Wendy Cottrell, age 16, and forced them into the car they had carjacked. They then drove them to the outskirts of town to a gravel pit, and Marvalis and DeMarcus shot and killed both of them. After they murdered these 2 people in cold blood, just barely more than children, they stole Wendy's shoes. This murder spree would have gone on and on and on. This gang was as ruthless as they were bloodthirsty. They had absolutely no regard for human life, for the well-being of themselves or others, and they were just a dangerous, I would say, pack of dogs, but even wild dogs stop killing when they're fed. They were more like monsters than anything else I can think of. Thankfully, an alert police officer was paying attention. Sergeant John Huber spotted the black Dodge Shadow that had been reported carjacked the day before, the one from the gas station. He pulled the car over, thinking he was just arresting car thieves. Surprisingly, the gang actually cooperated with the police officer and put their hands up and got out of the car. When he searched the car, he found the guns.
Retired Police Lieutenant John Huber, now Safety Director at Sinclair, remembers the day he caught them.
It's one of the memorable moments I've had working for Dayton.
After spotting them on Kumler Avenue in a stolen car.
They all cooperated, put their hands up. I was later to find out from the detectives that Laura Taylor told Marvellis King to shoot me, and he wouldn't.
I went in really hard on the cops a couple of weeks ago in my episode about Jean-Benet Ramsey. And I don't feel a bit bad about that because that was such a horribly handled case. But I also want to point out that cops have really scary jobs. What other job in the world is there where you're just sitting in your car and then you are required to walk up to a stolen car full of murderous maniacs and deal with all 4 of them at once? Cops have very, very dangerous jobs. This simple traffic stop could have turned out so very differently for this police officer, and he knows that. But he still got up every day and went out and did his job. So while we often talk about the many mistakes we see in law enforcement that are fair criticisms, we also have to talk about the situations cops are placed in and the good that they do every day. Moderation, people, right? We're going for moderation, for balance, correct? Now, we also have to keep in mind that this killing spree had only been going on for about 48 hours, and not just any 48 hours, but over the Christmas holiday. So I'm sure police were on a skeleton crew, and some of these victims hadn't even been discovered yet. Police had no idea, Dayton had no idea, the country had no idea, that as we all celebrated Christmas, this murder spree was taking place in Middle America. Joseph Wilkerson was still laying dead, tied to his bed in his apartment. The 2 teenagers murdered at the gravel pit had not been found either. Cops were aware of the murder of Danita Gillette and Sarah and some of the other shootings, the carjacking, but Dayton authorities, who usually have less than 1 murder per week, had no idea that they had a whole cluster of murders to deal with. The downtown posse was taken into custody and placed in separate rooms to be interviewed. I looked and looked for police interrogation video on this case, but I couldn't find any. I like to show you guys the killers speaking because I think that seeing them speak, hearing them speak, it brings them to life. And it shows us, it reminds us that these people are just people like we are. Sometimes we build these kinds of people up in our minds and we categorize them and compartmentalize them. And for me personally, seeing them speak and hearing their voices, it reminds me that no, they are not that much different from you or me. It helps me realize and remember that these types of people who do these monstrous things, they are not, in fact, monsters. They're just people. After all 4 members of the downtown posse are arrested, detectives begin to piece together everything that they have done, all of the murders and all of the crimes that this group has committed over the last few days. They were shocked and horrified to learn that so many people had lost their lives because these 4 evil people, just kids really, had nothing better to do for Christmas and killed people because they were bored. Laura Taylor and DeMarcus Smith were juveniles under the law, so they were immune from capital punishment. Heather Matthews cut a deal with prosecutors and agreed to testify, telling the whole story, if prosecutors would make her immune from the death penalty, which they agreed to do. Of course, this left Marvellus Keene holding the bag, and it's a bag he deserved. They went after him with everything the law allowed. Prosecutors wanted him put to death, and they made no secret about that. 6 people were dead. 6 lives had been snuffed out for absolutely no reason whatsoever. Joseph Wilkerson, Danita Gillette, Richmond Maddox, and Sarah Abraham were murdered just for coming into contact with this murderous group. Wendy Cottrill, a child of 16, and Marvin Washington were murdered for being unfortunate to just be in the wrong flop house, just existing and trying to get by in a flop house on Christmas. I mean, that's already sad, and I'm sure their lives were already difficult. And then on top of those that were murdered, 2 more were severely injured. Jeffrey Wright had multiple gunshot wounds to his legs, and Jones Pettis, that had been shot in the grocery store, was injured as well. This is a map of the killings. Those of you that are familiar with Dayton, which is a small city of around 180,000 people now and had about 130,000 people back in 1992, will be familiar with these street names. Joseph Wilkerson was killed on Wesleyan Road, which is the farthest location from the rest of the murders. Danita Gillette is killed here on Neal off of Shaw, and then most of the other crimes take place around that same area, with the exception of the shooting of Jeffrey Wright, which is back up near the first victim on Benton Avenue. Even the gravel pit isn't too far from the cluster of killings. It's just a few miles away. Someone tipped off police that there were 2 bodies at the city-owned gravel dump here at 1654 Richley Drive. So not only were these crimes committed in a very short amount of time, but they were committed geographically very close together. Dayton, Ohio has a very high crime rate, especially for such a small area. In Ohio right now, you have a 1 in 341 chance of being the victim of a violent crime, but you have a 1 in 100 chance of becoming the victim of a violent crime in Dayton. That's an incredible statistic. You have a 10% chance of being the victim of not only a crime like robbery or burglary, but the victim of a violent crime in Dayton. Now, these are today's statistics, but they have actually improved since the early 1990s. Ohio had 724 murders in 1992, compared with 538 murders in 2019. So it was an even more violent place back then. So it sounds like Dayton, Ohio really could use some help in the law enforcement department. I know that's easier said than done, but damn, a 10% chance of being victimized by a violent crime, that's high. Now, it comes out at trial that Marvellus Keene used to be a really good guy. He had been a good student, and he had never even been arrested before this event. His brother, who Marvellus had been very close to, had been shot and killed while committing a robbery a year before the Dayton Killing Spree, and everyone in Marvellus' life said his brother's death completely changed Marvellus. He became an entirely different person. He went from being calm and kind to angry and mean. He then had like a falling out with his father that seemed to be kind of the straw that broke the camel's back. He just kind of went off the deep end and didn't care anymore about what happened to him. The other 3 members of the group gave statements and were scheduled to go to trial. As this all happened, the world learned of the horrific acts that had been committed during the Christmas holiday, and the press began calling the gang the Devils of Dayton.
Most people in Dayton were gearing up for the Christmas holiday weekend. No one would have ever imagined what was about to unfold on the city's west side. In the end, 6 people would be dead. Christmas Eve, the first victim was discovered, 18-year-old Danita Goulet. She was shot while using a payphone at what used to be a neighborhood store for her gym shoes.
She was a happy-go-lucky person, somewhat shy, not really outgoing. She was very loving. She was very caring. She was easy to be around. I had every confidence in the world that my sister would have been something amazing.
Christmas Day, 19-year-old Richard Maddox was shot to death in his car. Doyle Burke, chief investigator for the Warren County Coroner, was on the Dayton homicide squad back then.
Anytime you have anything tragic around a holiday, especially Christmas, that just amplifies it.
December 26th, Sarah Abraham was shot during a robbery at her family's store and later died at the hospital. Little did detectives know these crimes were connected.
The fact that it was truly stranger-on-stranger crime, which is the most difficult homicide to solve. There was not even a motive.
Detectives also didn't know the killers were young, calling themselves the Downtown Posse, and that Christmas hanging out here at Courthouse Square. But once they killed Joseph Wilkerson on Christmas Eve, they used his Prescott Avenue home while he lay dead in a bedroom. The posse included 20-year-old Marvellis Keene and 3 teenagers, Laura Taylor, Heather Matthews, and DeMarcus Smith. December 27, 2 more bodies were found here at a city-owned gravel pit. Teenagers Wendy Cottrell and Marvin Washington were killed because the posse thought they would snitch.
Marvellis Keene's trial was very emotional and tense. Family members were angry. His mother begged for mercy, and Marvellis claimed he never meant for any of it to happen.
During the sentencing phase of his trial, Keene and his mother took the stand.
I know he has to be punished, but I ask you, I beg of you, don't take his life.
I never meant for nothing like this to ever happen.
At the time, family members of the victims weren't swayed by Keene's emotional display.
Marvellis was convicted and condemned to die. He was executed on July 21st, 2009, and we will be covering his execution on our playlist, Dining with the Damned. He had quite the last meal that, of course, I will recreate for you, so watch for that episode coming your way soon. Police testified at the other members' trials. Detective Burke said, "This was a game. This was for fun. They had taken these people's lives just the way we swat a fly."
If I could go back to December the 24th, 1992, I would gladly lay down my life for my sister. That's how much I love her.
Keene was executed in 2009. The other 3 got life sentences. In a prison interview, Heather Matthews blamed peer pressure for her role.
I wanted to be like them. I wanted to do what they was doing.
Laura Taylor started the crime spree by telling the group, "Let's put some drama in our lives." Detective Burke says they certainly got that.
They enjoyed it, they lived it, it made them somebody.
It made them the worst spree killers in Dayton history. Becky Grimes, Newssetter 7.
Heather Matthews was sentenced to 2 consecutive prison terms for her role in the killings. Her plea agreement saved her from execution, but she can never be paroled. Laura Taylor was also sentenced to 2 consecutive life terms. She will never leave prison either. DeMarcus Smith accepted a plea agreement just hours before his trial was scheduled to begin. In that plea agreement, he pled guilty and was sentenced to 4 consecutive life terms. I find it interesting that the women were sentenced to less than the men were. None of them are ever getting out of prison, but I think it's a good example of how we view women who commit the same crimes as men, and there is a little bit of a bias there. The Dayton Christmas Killers, the Devils of Dayton, whatever you want to call them, they're gone. Their leader is dead, and the other 3 are never getting out of prison, and I think the world is a safer place without them. I hope the many, many family members and friends who were victimized by these terrible acts are healing, and I wish them well. Thank you for joining me today on Dining with Death, True Crime Tuesday. I hope you're enjoying the holidays. If you haven't subscribed to my channel yet and you like the content, please do that. It helps me a lot. Stay safe and be kind to each other, and I'll see you next time on Dining with Death. Bye.